Hey everyone, hi, this is Samrat again. I'm the co-chair of Baseline Protocol, and I bring to you Baseline show from India every Saturday at 6 p.m. By the way, this time is very soon going to be revised to Thursday at 6 p.m. So that it can fit into everybody's working day. I've been getting a lot of requests since a long time, so finally it's happening. We're also reducing the duration of the show, so that it is bite-sized, it can fit into people's commutes, etc. Okay, so that's a small announcement on the baseline shows. So for today, I have a very special team. Today, for a change, we have so many people on the show. Mark, of course, Mark with a C is as always present with me on the baseline show in India every week. Thank you again, Mark, for making it this time as well. And going on to the next Mark on the show, we have Mark Remza and Keith Salzman and Yoav Bitan. We also have Sonal, who may not be showing on video right now, but she will come back to us very, very soon. So this week we decided to deep dive into a little bit of coding, what's going on with the core devs of Baseline. And Mark, Keith, and Yoav seem to be leading from the front. They've won several hackathons as a team in the past. They used to work for one of the biggest car makers in the world. And as I say, each time on these shows, any views and research that they present is their own personal intellectual property. It does not have to do with any of their employers, present or past. So with that, I bring upon Mark. Mark with a K. Let's hear your little bit of about yourself, your background, what you do, what are you doing currently, and then let's hear it from Keith and Yoav as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, hello, my name is Mark Rimza. I'm a former dev lead at General Motors. I worked there for 5 years. A little fun fact about me is even though I'm in IT, I actually have a business background from school, specifically business information systems. So a little bit of a different twist. And that feeds into the current role that I have at Baseline right now, because while I am a developer, solutions architect, and have been involved with the technical side of things, I'm very interested in the use cases of Baseline, specifically from a business standpoint. And one of the big problems that we're trying to solve here is how we can actually commercialize Baseline or bring it to the wider masses. So you're getting a little preview of what we're going to be talking about later in the show here, but that's a little bit about me, and I'll give it over to Keith here.
Hey, thank you, Mark with a K. So as you know, my name is Keith. My traditional background has been in a full stack experience, various different stacks, Java to React, or like a Node to React or Angular. And I too worked as a software development engineer for GM, now working for Baseline, hoping and actually getting involved in the more technical side of things. So I like to refer to myself sometimes as Marquet's counterpart, that he takes care of the business aspect, and I go usually for the more deep technical stuff. So this involves, actual standards implementations. I've done work in different blips, baseline implementations and improvement proposals, as well as, ZKP stuff. Anything ZKP, I love. And I'll pass it to Yoav now.
Thank you, Keith with a K. My name is Yoav, also a former software developer engineer at General Motors. I have my degree in computer science, and I've been interested in crypto and blockchain for quite a long time. So when I was offered to check out ETH Atlanta, I thought that was a really exciting opportunity. When I saw what blockchain was up to, or what Baseline, excuse me, when I saw what Baseline was up to over at ETH Atlanta, I got really excited to kind of get involved. And I'm very excited to say that I'm now also working on Baseline full-time with Keith and Mark and Sonal. And Keith described himself as being the counterpart to Mark. I would say I'm somewhere in between. I'll be definitely working in both ends, both in business as well as on the tech side, and working closely with the core developers as well. So yeah, very excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you for making time for the Baseline show in India, and of course for doing this so early in the morning for you guys. And with that, for the community, a major update for the community is that Baseline finally has Baseline Labs, and it's now populated with talented people. Of course, Sonal was the seed or the genesis block of uh, of Baseline Labs, but then we have now got Mark, Keith, and Yoav. So cool stuff happening. They, of course, they, if you hear their story, how they entered Baseline community and now where they are, it's pretty interesting, and of course very it's inspiring for people to join in and contribute to Baseline, and also in the eventually make a lot of money, right? So with that I call upon Mark. You would like to present, would like to make a presentation, right? That's what we spoke about.
Yeah, absolutely.
For Baseline, go
I'll
ahead.
go ahead and share it. All right, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so a little context here about what we're about to show you is this is an exercise that we did for Baseline before we joined. You could consider this sort of a thought experiment of a typical activity that's going to be going on in Baseline Labs, specifically for the effort to commercialize Baseline. So what we're about to show you is how you would think about commercializing Baseline, specifically in the vein of supply chain. And here we're looking at a specific problem that car makers face. And in this case, we're saying it's a problem that Tesla is facing here.
Sure.
And real quick, the disclaimer here is that, all information involving Tesla or anything like this is our own conjecture or personal ideas. And I think Samrat already touched on that. So first off, when we're giving presentations like this or doing this thought experiment from the business angle of things, it's very important to understand the layout of the business and the problems that they face. And the biggest problem that Baseline solves is multi-party coordination. And the real superpower of Baseline is that it can coordinate with these parties under zero knowledge. So when we take a look at Tesla's supply chain, we can see that they spend massive amounts globally across the US, huge supplier accounts. All of this indicates to us that they have a lot of parties that they need to coordinate with. This isn't a super crazy take here. This is the essence of supply chain. There are a lot of moving pieces and you need to coordinate with all of them. But the main takeaway here is that the supply chain that Tesla operates, it relies on a couple main categories of things that we can communicate that Baseline solves. Specifically, data security. I think you could say that Baseline in a way is programmable privacy, and synchronized workflows is another key component of supply chain. And you need to have clear communication between those parties, and that clear communication can come in the way of synchronizing those activities and records in each party's traditional systems of record. So now that we have a ripe example here for the picking that we would like to apply Baseline to, the next step is zeroing in on a specific problem that Baseline can help solve. And one of the hardest parts of coming up with a good use case in business, especially when coordinating under zero knowledge, at least that I've experienced, and maybe Keith and Yoav can back this up, is oftentimes you may find a situation where you could coordinate with somebody under zero knowledge, but it's really only a situation that it would be particularly advantageous to for one person. So although it sounds simple, one of the biggest things that you need to keep in mind when you're thinking of these zero knowledge coordination examples is it has to be beneficial in business for both parties. And if one company is losing some serious competitive advantage, it's going to be much harder to get them on board, at least with these specific examples. So in the case that we have here on the screen, what we're talking about is the chip shortage, which is a very common problem in supply chain right now. Nobody is able to get a hold of semiconductors, and semiconductors are used in nearly anything, and they're used in the car industry. And the supply chain use case that we have here has to do with a semiconductor purchasing specialist for Tesla. He needs to purchase semiconductors But the big problem here is both parties want to keep the performance of the semiconductors private. Tesla doesn't want to reveal the performance of their semiconductors because it could signal how performant their products are, which could negatively affect their performance against other car companies. And what this is they want a range proof in zero knowledge terms. They want to verify that they have a specific amount of performance within a range without actually stacking themselves up against individual competitors. And on the supplier side of things, they also don't want their performance to be revealed because they don't want to lose their competitive advantage with other suppliers, because suppliers right now, because there's such a shortage, they want to gouge the people who are buying those semiconductors. They don't want to lose out to another supplier that is able to supply semiconductors at a higher price. They want to keep it masked so that they can continue to reap all the benefits of this supply chain shortage that everybody is experiencing. So with this example, we can see that both parties would be benefiting from the privacy that would be going on here. And a little extra twist that Baseline could add to this equation here is the ability to actually program logic into this privacy that we can provide to both companies. They could create tests that could be rolled into a proof saying, I would only provide you semiconductors if they meet our specific standards over here in Tesla. And we could include that computation into a Baseline implementation. So without further ado, I'm gonna move forward here. And I think Yoav is gonna talk about this, but once you've clearly defined the problem, there's a clear next step whenever you're pitching this to other companies and getting them on board.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So now that we have a use case identified and a company we would like to present it to, first you have to start, of course, with explaining what is Baseline, right? You can't exactly pitch it without them knowing what they're getting themselves into. So here we would have some basic things that we'd like to mention. We'd want to introduce core concepts of the protocol. We'd like to give them a clear, simple explanation. We don't want to get too technical heavy off the bat, just kind of an overall, here's the standard, here's how well it is at concealing private data and accomplishing the main goal of multi-party synchronization, as well as being used as a verifiable system of record. We'd also definitely want to show off all the companies that are involved, especially those with the big name recognition. Like bottom left are our founders of ConsenSys, EY, and Microsoft. You know, such tech giants with such legitimacy to them. It would really offer a lot to the Baseline protocol as a whole to say these are the big name brand companies that you are working with. And really, essentially, we would just want to explain the core of Baseline and give them details that would pertain to their specific use case in their business, and show off how Baseline would improve what they already have using.
I think all of us are proud of the partners and sponsors and founders of Baseline. I think it's pretty cool. And that list just keeps growing. And for people who are watching us, and if you want to check more about Baseline, go to baseline-protocol.org. You will get a section called Get Involved. You will find all the links to our social handles as well as the Slack channel. Do join in and you'll find all of us there. Go ahead. Keith, is that your portion?
Oh yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Super. Go ahead.
But yeah, thank you, Samrat. So I think so far in a presentation of this type, of this flavor, you know, Mark has talked about and set the stage for the problem that Baseline seeks to solve. Yoav has introduced just the basic foundational idea of Baseline. So at this point, we tend to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the technical side. So why do we do that? Well, we don't want to spend too long with this just kind of idea of baseline as this magical, whimsical thing that can solve these problems without building a type of mental model in the audience's mind of really how this would work in practice, albeit kind of a simple stand-in, of course, for what would happen in reality, as most things of this nature are, right? So depending on the level of the audience, of course, a presenter, and us in this case, might have to adapt to, the depths of the technicality they get into, whether you're pitching, straight to business team or you have actual tech teams involved. But we want to give them some true insight into, the core principles, ideas behind how baseline will actually solve, let's say in this case, the communication that semiconductor is within a certain range of quality. We want to give that implementation wise how that's going to be done, right? So we give them usually this graph, which here this graphic will detail kind of an interaction after setting up kind of baselining two different companies. Here are the examples with Tesla to a supplier. So the supplier of the semiconductor to Tesla, the buyer of the semiconductor. And we like to show from a high view. Sometimes we go in and show like a single transaction, how it moves, detailed every detail. But here for the initial pitch, we go from a high view. Where would the BPI, that baseline protocol instance, where would it drop in between them? How does each side kind of transfer that state object between? They're making different calls to the BPI while the BPI has this internal API that's connecting with the baseline protocol core stack, a CCSM possibly, depending on the unique implementation of it, right? And then on top of that, within the CCSM layer, we have some kind of BPI contract between those two parties, right? So we want to make those connections of where everything's flowing on the high level here, and kind of give that audience like a peer through the looking glass into how baseline is going to solve these problems, right? So at this point, I think we can move on to the next slide, unless there are any questions at this point.
I think I'm good. That's and thank you for bringing on the tech stack and sort of reference implementation of baselining. But Mark, you've been talking a lot about in the past, and I would like to bring you in here about what does it take from the outside. So this is all under the hood, right? This is all under the hood stuff which Keith just brought in. But you talk about business systems and how they integrate and what's the total cost of ownership is so low. It's in the OpEx model.
Which Mark?
It was Mark with a C.
Mark with a C. Yeah. As far as from the outside, it's really interesting, especially because I've actually worked on a project that did involve GM. This is about three and a half years ago in their finance, accounting, and procurement, which the use case that Mark is illustrating today dealt with one aspect of it called source to pay. And this is where you have really curating and organizing all of these invoices so that they can be properly logged into the system, and really start the whole process of the supply chain as far as it being paid and settled and closed. And one of the big things that they had was, GM had over 1 million suppliers, and each one of them is invoicing for their for the goods that have already been delivered, and they're just waiting to get paid according to the terms of their agreement. And a lot of times someone will go ahead and send an invoice, and then there hasn't been any activity, so they'll go ahead and send another invoice, and so it's another duplicate that had come through there, which just adds to the process flow. But also they were really starting to be concerned about a lot of these duplicate invoices being paid, and because the data set was, the inflow was so massive that it was impossible really to keep tabs on, every invoice that just flowed through the entire process. And Baseline really does a lot to actually sit there, because it will make sure that there's acknowledgement with more than one party within the process environment. So they can say, wait a minute, we've already paid this, or wait, we've already seen this invoice and we've already set it in a PIN file to be paid in 30, 60, 90 days, depending on the arrangement. And it really would cut down on just that process waste, because again, the inflow is so massive that to really keep, and molecular type attention on every invoice was just impossible. And so by having Baseline, you enter it in, but it's also visible and acknowledged by, the other members within the multi-party process environment. So it cuts down natively from, a lot of this duplicate invoice just from the process waste. So, and not to say anything that there may be some, bad actors in there that are trying to sneak a couple of invoices in there and maybe change the payment addresses. If there were some hackers to go in there, they would be able to go in there and probably not be detected for quite a while, just because it's so crowded. So to kind of wrap it up, Baseline goes a long way of actually, not only synchronizing it, but also making an accounting of everything that is inflowing on the side.
No, I think Mark, to your point about bad actors in the whole process, I have actually seen an incident. An invoice processing company in India had reported that their data was compromised. What actually means that the hackers got access to all invoices of their customers. And now imagine the wealth of data that these guys stole and could potentially sell to their customers. So back to the technical discussion. If we were to so one is the Tesla side of the story, right? What does it take for the suppliers in terms of technology to integrate with a system like this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, so that's one of the, sorry, did somebody else want to jump in?
Anybody can talk.
Okay. So I think that's one of the really key and unique facets of, two companies or more really Baseline would be needed for 3 multi-party or more is where it shines. But that's one of the really the key gains here is that at its core, the Baseline story is this one-size-fits-all unique implementation that sits between the 3 or more parties. Of course, we simplified it here in the diagram for terms of presentation and wrapping your mind around it, and understanding a rudimentary sense. And that's really the main problem that Baseline kind of seeks to solve, right? That anything in addition to that is just kind of a bonus gain, right? That the addition of ZKPs and hiding the sensitive data, or the use of VCs, or CCSM, but being able to drop in this custom one-size-fits-all, almost like a connector, really, but more advanced between your side and then anybody else who uses that same implementation. Well, then, I mean, if you have the implementation there on your side, and then of course you go to create that agreement between the 2 parties, I mean, that's all it takes, right?
Super.
Feel free, anybody else, to jump in. If I'm missing something, I'm sure. No, I got it all. Okay.
Well, I think the question was like the core components that like a company would need, right? And that would be, you need to have access to APIs. You need an identity system. You need access to a CCSM, but you don't necessarily need to use one. And Keith, what's the other component that I'm missing here?
So, and that's one of the great things about Baseline and the core packages and everything, is that they really bring detail and definition, down to the different types of packages and let's say, I think, services that Mark was mentioning with identity and privacy and vault and all these messaging and all these other things. is that it brings kind of an interface definition to those things that need to be implemented. So you have these reference implementations that exist and examples throughout the repository. You have these other repositories that are kind of enabling baseline. You have things like NARC that allow for development of ZKC circuit or ZK circuits and all that other stuff, ZK snarks. So you have the enabled around, you have that kind of interface in the middle that sets up what you need to define, and then the company itself can decide how to implement specifically down to the custom logic, which is necessary if you want that one size custom fits all, especially when you're implementing that MSA that details the whole foundation of that BPI between, in this case, like Tesla and the supplier, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that answers more effectively what you were asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's pretty detailed, and that's what I needed. So, the whole idea should be that it's easy to use, and even smaller companies can jump on board. I think all of those act as sort of the first first questions that we get. When we're talking about adoption, when we're talking about people joining the baseline community, they said, yeah. Let's see production implementations. Let's see. Big software companies or SaaS companies also giving out out of the box integration with baselining, for example. So that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So I think now is also the right time to talk about connectors. So do you think it's worthwhile for SaaS companies to invest in creating baseline connectors right now?
I'll let our business side handle.
Well, I've been wondering about that myself. It's sort of a tricky question, because I think between two parties, the connectors can do just fine. Like, let's say between SAP and SAP. But certainly if you're coordinating with between SAP and Microsoft Dynamics, you could benefit from baseline. But the real benefit comes in when you have more than two parties who are all coordinating. I think it is worthwhile to invest in it. The hardest part for me is just envisioning how those implementations would look, because I think it's worth investing in, but then I go straight to, well, how could we practically implement this from a solutions point of view? And that gets much more complicated.
And just to add something.
Oh, go ahead. No, you.
Okay, I was just going to mention that when Mark mentioned like the SAP to SAP, we had a conversation with Splunk earlier this week on our Wednesday baseline show. And when it comes to a company implementing baseline in their already existing products, that's a whole nother discussion, because if you think about the SAPs or Splunks, baseline can be just part of their underlying architecture and existing solutions, and allow them to provide additional capabilities on top of what they already provide. And they don't even need to explain the back end, because nobody knows what's going on under the hood anyways, who's using these products. So that's a very cool angle to approach it from as well. And then there's the cross platform coordination as well.
Right.
Well,
Right.
And I would say another thing that we had, really been developing in lockstep with everything else is the concept of the global phone book. We want to have a whitelist of, counterparties that are already set up to baseline, that if you're new to baselining and you do business with a lot of these people, you want to build this community to where you can look it up and say, oh, they're already baseline, and you can set up that connection a lot quicker.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And just to kind of add in that I think to what Mark was saying, more in like the technical implementation, if we kind of assess, like, does it make sense to be able to do this technical implementation? Well, eventually we're going to do some kind of business calculation on, what gains do we have, right? Do those gains in, let's say, the ability to communicate with anybody who has implemented a baseline protocol, to those gains of info security, right? InfoSec through ZKPs or VCs, those justify the initial investment, which to me, because I'm usually more tech heavy side, anytime there's a new cool tech, I'm just like, oh, implement it. Like, of course, why would I not implement it? But I then have to like keep in mind, I usually need Mark K to come to me and be like, well, does it always make sense business wise? And that's kind of why I threw him originally, is yeah, we can definitely, it makes sense to just implement it from a technical side, right? Let's get increased security, increased communication, all these factors, which actually, Mark, if you jump to the next slide.
Right.
Yeah, good
and
point.
that's the next thing that we usually go to in the presentation.
No, why I asked that question is because Mark C and me, Samrat Kishore, we have been planning to launch a company in just do baseline connectors.
Yeah, sit there and
Okay.
sure. Definitely network effects, and the more traction of this you can have, the more that it's going to be populating this global phone book, and so it'll make the setup a lot easier. One question that I would have, and actually I think Keith and Mark could probably both take a stab at it, is say I'm a big global Fortune 500 company or something like that, and I want to do this. Where is the attachment point? Where would I put this in my architecture? As far as the root, as far as API connections or something like that, that would be one thing that I would be interested to find out is where in my big vast IT architecture is this attached?
That's a good question. So I think to like accurately answer, it would have first you'd have to have a working knowledge of which company are we talking about, right? Which system within that company, because we talk about these huge enterprises, they have tons of services. If they're large enough, they have their own data warehouses spun up and everything, right? Let's say if they go from like the ground up, really, as they're building this, they can, if they have their own data warehouse, they can put it out there, build these implementations from their side, their own protocol implementation. If not, they, could be somewhere out in like a virtual machine somewhere, AWS, right? Once it's built to the point where they could integrate it with one of their legacy systems, well, they would just make sure that on the one side, that it can receive information with that legacy system. So for us, that's generally just, creating one side has a set of APIs open to another side, right?
Yeah.
So that could be your legacy system has these APIs that are open internally already because they have to share this information with your other, all kinds of services, right?
Yeah.
So when we build that some kind of our own, reference implementation, it would probably be spun up in another service that just goes and sends out these calls to those APIs to get that information, right? And then it would still be inside kind of our internal, it would become part of then our legacy systems before it, interacts with the BPI. Because of course, there's a lot of stuff you want to do in there before you send out information, obscuring the private data, et cetera, stuff like that.
Super. I think I get that question a lot. And I think I asked that question to you guys last time around. The biggest competition to baselining, which I get from people is, we already have an API based integration. So till the time, I think we have to find the right use cases. Till the time there are non-trusting parties who are not comfortable coordinating or sharing information via APIs, this is not going to make sense to them. And then there is also on-premise computing. So a lot of people said that, if we do via APIs, also if we do on-premise computing, we encrypt the data before it gets into transit, then also it's fine. So any thoughts on that?
I would think synchronization, no matter what. I mean, that's really where baseline comes in and says, yes, you do on-prem computing, and you don't necessarily, or you don't want to share information and stuff just because of either data privacy or competitive position. But wouldn't you like to know that you're at least synchronized without revealing anything? I mean, I don't see a downside to it just because, even at its basic level, you're getting that synchronization of all the parties in a multi-party environment, and that addresses so many business problems immediately with back office reconciliation, with just having data out of sync and the make good actions that have to happen to get them back in sync. I think at its basic utility baseline still is very compelling just on the synchronization alone.
Yeah, I agree.
I would also imagine that the more parties that get involved and the larger this web becomes, the more complex that whole process would be to do in-house. Whereas baseline can kind of just slot in, and that's its whole design, right? Is to manage all these multi-parties in an efficient and effective way.
Cool. I have a question on the landscape, just building on to what Mark C had mentioned earlier, which was, where does it fit in? Now imagine a situation where I have multiple systems using which I'm generating the data, which eventually has to be synced with, let's say, other systems of record, which are with, let's say, with my counterparty. So what do I do? Do I baseline the systems within my premise as well? And then, so is it zero trust? Like every system has to prove to each other, even while they may be within my trusted network, or do these guys have some kind of a handshake? And then once I have synchronized between the systems which are on my side, I then baseline with my counterparty. How does it work?
Now I want to just give an opinion there. In my previous job, I was on some cloud migration projects for banking clients. And even within the organization itself, there was, when we were trying to get all the data from all of the departments that existed to migrate them to the cloud, there was different contracts, different things that needed to be done in order to derive that data, even though we knew it was going to this common place for the same company. And I think it wasn't even regarding the trust. It was regarding just the more stops a point of data has, the more places it's going, the more at risk it is to security threats and all those things. So I think even in the situations where parties may trust each other and they might not be worried about that, there's always the security threats and the unknowns that could come within all the possibilities of the other companies they work with who also have access to that data and so on. So like once you let go of that data and you share it, it's like everything we do with our phones and the platforms we use, it's gone. It's mass distributed. So I think that's my answer to that question.
Yeah. But but I think in the banking parlance, I think it's also important to transfer data at times because there are machine learning models, for example, which are utilizing that data, or there is processing happening using that data, and then processed information gets fed into, let's say, another downstream system. So I mean, totally depends on the use cases, definitely. But my question was more technical, that let's say if I have, let's say I'm an organization, I have two systems of record, and the piece of information has to, these two things have to come together, and then I have to sync with my counterparty. So do I baseline the two systems which I have within my premise as well, or do I just baseline once, which is with my counterparty?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It's a complex question. And I imagine from now until I don't know how long in the future, we have to take it case by case, right? But I think it depends on, what type of, because we're talking more like an intra baselining versus an inter baselining. And again, from the tech side, I want to be like, do it all, because it sounds great. I think, let's say if you have your own data warehouse, or, a lot of data exchange are still on premises, for example, then it might make sense to just drop one in easily between all of your systems. But then at the same time, it's like, well, if it's only on premise, then it's easy to protect, right? So why
that won't make commercial sense, because I'll be spending dollars and cents on baselining each time I want to baseline a piece of information. So baselining my internal system does not make sense to me. That's the commercial side of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would, like Mark C said earlier, would give you this kind of synchronization, right? So what your assumption for the dollars and cents there is based on what, like a type of CCSM that you're implementing, or what?
Yeah, something like that, or something like what base ledger is doing, for example. they're giving you an Amazon-like way of baselining via the cloud, right? Baselining as a service. So if I were to baseline two systems within my premise or within my trusted network, I would think that maybe I'm wasting money here. I would rather use that same money and baseline with my other counterparties.
All right,
Mark,
so
you
let's
say
say
something.
the,
Yeah.
go ahead, yeah.
Sorry, we keep cutting each other.
No, I mean, if you sit there and you look at it, I mean, think back in the kind of dark early days of blockchain. I mean, where everybody was trying to do that single source of truth within their enterprise. That we wanted to break down the gatekeeping. We wanted to make sure that somebody in warehouse could at least have visibility into finance or inventory, and that, but there was no synchronization. It was just basically everybody had the same copy of the ledger. And that's what everybody wanted to do. And it's amazing, kind of what we're talking about here, how so much that it almost seems almost foreign to us now. And so I would say that there is definitely a value to that, because again, it was one thing that we were trying to achieve way back when. And but another value add for baseline is if you have that type of enterprise private permissioned blockchain solution that you're starting to that you've been working on, and you're running into problems as far as scaling, as far as covering that last mile, baseline is a way that you can come in and salvage a lot of that instead of having to do that entire implementation, that more complex full-fledged blockchain migration, to where you're going to displace certain parts of the architecture. Why not use the existing architecture and just synchronize it together and be able to prove that consistency, so you have a root of trust instead of that single source of truth? So and we've had a couple of people that were really interested in baseline saying, I've been working on this particular private permission, maybe a Hyperledger Fabric based solution, and I'm running into problems, and I'm getting some some hard looks from my leadership right now. What can I do? Well, this is a way that you can save your bacon. I mean, you can there and pivot and come in and get the functionality.
Technical debt is a big problem everywhere. Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. I think that was a great perspective. Guys, you wanted to go to the next slide and talk about something? I had asked my question earlier.
Yeah, sure. The next slide is actually like everything, the content of this last discussion, which is really just all the different in the presentation at this point, move on to all the different advantages, the gains that you would get in addition to the more obvious ones that we've already discussed and kind of beat thoroughly. But yeah, you can see them here on the screen, and there's no reason to really read all of them out. But obviously, we talked about synchronization, InfoSec, increased validity and integrity, so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, I love how we have come a long way into now classifying ourselves as more of a cybersecurity protocol. But I think it's really incredible. So if we go and look at what other cybersecurity protocols do, then I think we do way more than these guys. So that way we are a very good cybersecurity protocol, and we must appeal to all CIOs and CISOs.
Yeah, it's not fair to even really pitch it as just or mainly a. So it does so much more than that, right?
Yeah.
So I think another thing too that I could add real quick about this is these are all attributes of benefits of baseline that we want to get more research and insight into as well. We want to know how much companies are spending on their multi-party workflows. Right now, I mean, these are good conjectures about how baseline could help out, but the real when companies would really want to start sinking their teeth into it is when you can implement it with one company, and you can actually measure how baseline is affecting their bottom line from thenceforth. And that's one of the bigger things that we want to start looking into. At least before we can implement it now, we want to start getting research into what are all of these multi-party workflows that companies are engaging in, how much is being spent on them, how long is it taking to get these accomplished, how much remediation are people really experiencing, what's what's a reasonable estimate for how you could cut that down? I think these are some of the biggest questions that we need to start solving when it comes to commercializing baseline, so that it's very easy for people to latch onto and understand right away.
Absolutely. Mark left at a wrong time, because this would have been his pitch. Because that's what we are creating an enablement deck within the outreach team to empower and give ammunition to people who believe in baseline and who want to sell it internally within their organizations, and also sort of make them join baseline community. And then of course, there's a ton of discussion which is going on within the TSC as well, around getting third parties involved and getting research done. I think John also created a blip, Sonal, if I'm not wrong. I think John went ahead and created a blip for this.
Yeah, he did. I think, as Mark was just mentioning, one of the missing pieces is some real data to back this up,
Yeah.
and it exists. It's just that nobody has went forward to put some facts behind this problem that's at hand about multi-party coordination. So now
Yeah.
we put forward a blip to put some funds towards a research or analyst firm putting together some reports for us.
Awesome. So that's coming soon. Folks who are watching us today or maybe in future on YouTube. So let's come to our next section, which is also the last section. Oh, you want to talk about more? Is it like a get baseline? Okay, so get baseline section is available on our website, baseline-protocol.org. I've been talking about it a lot. That was like the super cool thing which recently happened for the baseline community. We upgraded our website. We also got get baseline section. I was just going to come to the backgrounds of Mark, Keith, and Yoav, the way they've shaped up their involvement with baseline community, and also now sitting in baseline labs. So guys, the basic question to all of you is what was your level of understanding of blockchain, and how much time you spent with blockchain before you came into baseline, started actually baseline?
I would say the engagement with blockchain before this was relatively low, but we sort of all got our start at the ETH Atlanta hackathon when we met the team, and before that we were doing learning on blockchain because we were interested in it. But I think it is important to note that channeling John here, baseline isn't necessarily a blockchain story. It's an infosec story. So when it comes to baseline or implementing baseline, you don't really need a lot of knowledge about blockchain. And the idea when we are implementing this, or at least introducing it to companies, is that they shouldn't have to have a lot of information about blockchain either. It should introduce the concepts of it being tamper-proof and being able to synchronize these signed events that are going on. But I think you could limit people's understanding just to that and have them be happy with the benefits that baseline provides. But I think Keith and Yoav could go into their experiences a little bit more.
Yeah, I would say when first hearing about baseline, first being pitched to the concept as a whole, it can feel quite overwhelming at the beginning, just because it sounds like there's so much, right? But I think the beauty of an open source community like what we have here is that everything that there is available to you. You can go through the Git, you can see everything, you can read all of the documentation, you can find examples, you can go straight into the code itself or the standards themselves, and you can just, if you have the time, you can read everything. And just with that, everything's at your fingertips. You can really dive in. It's really what you make of it, how much you want to invest in it, but everything's available.
Yeah. So this is a solid pitch to any developers who would like to join the Core Devs group. First of all, I think the biggest thing is you now have mentors. We no more a cold start. You now have over 50 people, right, in the Core Devs team. So you will get responses to any questions you may have. You will get support on getting started as well. And of course, the three gentlemen on today's call, they've had their bit of. I think when you guys started off, you were facing the cold start problem, right? And Keith, now to your story.
Oh, no. What was it? Which problem?
You had the cold start problem. You guys had to figure out everything out on your own.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And especially at the hackathon, nonetheless, right? So we didn't get much sleep that weekend. But yeah,
No, we did
nothing real different from what these two have said, right? It's just, whatever side you want to dig into, business or technical, you just kind of put your head down and absorb information, and you get there inevitably, right? At first, anything complex looks insurmountable, but the small bits of information that you consume each day, and the mountain gets a little smaller, right?
I think to add on to that is, I think if you want a specific example of maybe one of the challenges that we experienced when we were getting onboarded to Baseline is the zero knowledge aspect, and a story of this is from the hackathon when we were thinking of our idea. It's even though it can be hard to think of really good solid use cases for zero knowledge that either nobody's thought before or are massively beneficial to both parties in business. When you do finally lock onto that one example, when you actually physically turning that into code, being familiar with those zero knowledge circuits, how to construct them, the libraries like Socrates or NARC, it can be hard to actually understand how to do those things because the libraries are hard to understand at the outset, and it's a very math heavy thing to sink your teeth into. And Keith is great at math, so it clicks right away for him. But for someone like me, actually dialing down and constructing those circuits can be a hard thing for other people to get into right away.
Super cool. Awesome. And of course, the biggest advantage now is that we are also sitting on another new and improved pool of funds to give out as grants, which also means that more and more developers can come in, they can start contributing, and they can propose new blips, and they can get grants to work on those things. So you get to work on really cool stuff, and you also get paid for that. Okay, with that, I would like to wrap up today's shows. We are already over time. The time just flew past today. You guys were so insightful. Thank you guys once again. And Sonal, just one last bit. Why don't you give some community updates? You're the star of Baseline.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I'll focus on now is that since we've had these three join the team, the ConsenSys Mesh Baseline R&D team, since they've joined, we've been able to kind of piece together anything they were missing that would have been useful to learn about Baseline and how to implement Baseline. We have note of everything, and we're making sure that we start creating these resources for people going forward. And also in our core dev community, there's a wide range of people. There's ones who've joined within the last few days, and then there's people who are ready to get in the weeds of a project. So anybody out there who's considering joining, we definitely have a home for you. And we will give our formal updates on next Wednesday at our Baseline General Assembly. And if you take a look at our LinkedIn or Twitter, and we will add it to our website soon, we have an Ask Me Anything form for any community members or people who have been following closely or curious about Baseline to ask us any questions that they wouldn't feel comfortable asking otherwise about what we're up to in the community. So we'll give some more formal updates there, but this was an awesome and fun show.
Yeah. And so now we have, so with that, now we also have a way of asking a question one-on-one, right? Otherwise it would have been in the Slack community. By the way, any answers I've seen, any questions in the Slack community get answered in about 10 to 15 minutes. I think that's pretty amazing for a community like ours. With that, thank you all once again. We come to the end of this show. Once again, this is Samrat signing off. See you next Thursday. This time it's Thursday.